A group of Democratic and Republican lawmakers in Washington has proposed a bill that would end travel restrictions to Cuba for all U.S. citizens and legal residents. Our correspondent Alexandra Hall has more.
In a first show of congressional support for normalizing relations with Cuba, a bipartisan coalition of senators introduced the Freedom to Travel to Cuba Act of 2015, urging Congress and the public to remember sanctions on Cuba are prohibitions on Americans.
We're simply saying that Americans should be allowed to have the right to travel wherever they would like to, unless there's a compelling national security reason.
The announcement came just hours after Cuban President Raúl Castro declared that the United States owes the Cuban people monetary compensation for the suffering caused by 50 years of failed U.S. policy towards Cuba. Some said that's unlikely to happen.
The U.S. is not going to compensate Cuba, it's not going to compensate Russia, it's not going to compensate China or any other country that we have levied sanctions on in the last 80 years.
The measure presented by Democrats and Republicans would also cut restrictions on banking transactions related to travel. Normalizing economic relations is a process that has already begun, but U.S. investment in Cuba is still prohibited.
President Obama has liberalized a number of restrictions to the extent of the executive ability. He's increased the ability of American citizens to travel to Cuba. But in terms of normalizing economic relations, allowing commercial flights, allowing U.S. businesses to invest in Cuba, Helms-Burton would have to be lifted.
By some estimates, full economic participation on both sides could bring in around $6 billion to each country annually. But neither the United States nor Cuba will see a dime as long as the embargo persists. Alexandra Hall, Telesur, Washington.